Right, I'll stand up here too. I am in familiar territory here because I was educated here at Christchurch back in the late 60s, early 70s. And I can honestly say that I don't remember hearing the name Kipling at all. I wasn't reading him at that stage. I'd read him earlier on. And as far as Orwell was concerned, yes, he was somewhat on the agenda. I read Animal Farm and the 1984 Homage to Catalonia, the essays. But the nearest I sort of came, I think the political commentators that I was introduced to were political philosophers such as John Stuart Mill. And I personally read a lot of American writers at that time, and people like Norman Mailer was my sort of political commentator, I think. There's a reason for this, was that it was really a period at the end of empire, a confusing period, when Kipling and to an extent Orwell had their time. The nearest Kipling came to Christchurch, in fact, was the church of that name in Shimla, where his father, Lockwood, designed the fresco for the chancel window. But since that time, I've come to enjoy, well, first of all, read, enjoy, and quietly revere the writings of Kipling. And that's clearly something that Orwell did too. You may know his comment when Kipling died, and Orwell did a sort of an obituary. He said, "I worshipped him at 13, loathed him at 17, enjoyed him at 20, despised him at 25, and now again rather admire him." And the fact is that Orwell, overall, was rather a fan of Kipling. He would attack members of his generation, such as Auden, as a sort of gutless Kipling. And even in this essay, which is meant to be so damning, the one that Auden wrote in response to Eliot's book of verse, he can't help expressing his admiration. Of course, he castigates Kipling for some of his views, and he's right. Sometimes Kipling slipped into silly demonization of whole groups of people, whether Indian Babus or vote-seeking women. And yes, he was a conservative, and he was an imperialist to boot. But Orwell knew where Kipling was coming from. He realized that Kipling was a man of his times, with an immediate family background of imperial service to the Raj. When Kipling also worked in India, after school, which Charles mentioned, he went back and worked as a journalist. He came to rather glorify the achievements of the administrators, the road builders, the lawgivers, and even the soldiers, who in his terms had brought peace, stability and progress to India, and to build them, and he built this up into an ideology. But Orwell, in his earlier obituary, in New English Weekly, acknowledged that this attitude had its saving graces. Again, Charles has sort of referred to this. He said, and Orwell said, "The imperialism of the 80s and 90s was sentimental, ignorant and dangerous, but it was not entirely despicable. The picture then called up by the word empire was a picture of overworked officials and frontier skirmishers, not of Lord Beaverbrook and Australian butter. It was still possible to be an imperialist and a gentleman, and of Kipling's personal decency there can be no doubt." Now times have moved on. It's 75 years since Kipling's death, and his star is curiously again in the ascendant. I'm not just talking about sort of silly things such as his poem If being voted the nation's favourite, although I suppose that has some significance. I'm talking about the reassessment that is going on of his work as critics move beyond knee-jerk reactions to his politics and begin to understand his greatness as a writer. The fact that he was a conservative and fearful of the influence of crowds in the political arena a legacy of his time in India and then in the United States, did not mean he did not understand and sympathise with individual people. Indeed, I would say that he wrote better than Orwell about ordinary men and women. Orwell was perhaps better at animals. To support this, I can quote you from any number of poems and stories. From the woman in his remarkable late story, The Wish House, who takes on the cancer of her husband, to the much earlier in Plain Tales from the Hills, the little boy Muhammad Din, servant boy, that he clearly empathises with very greatly. The story opens with an epigraph in the form of a question from a much earlier Sanskrit writer. And this epigraph goes, "Who is the happy man?" And the answer is immediately provided, "He that sees in his own house at home little children with dust, leaping and falling and crying." But the narrator in the story of Muhammad Din is not a happy man. He is one of the Sahibs, and he is not in his own house at home, nor is the little child in the story his own, but the offspring of his native servant. Kipling depicts the tragedy of this young boy who dies, but at the same time he shows real understanding of the unease of the British position in India. You get the same sympathy and knowledge of India in his amazing account of the Lahore courtesan, Lilith, in his story On the City Wall. But this time there is an overtly political dimension, the ambivalence of the mission-educated Indian, Wali Dad, who gets caught up in a demonstration of religious fanaticism. As a result, the story works both as narrative and as history. Looking at Kipling from a sort of the way that he looks at history, I commend to you the subtlety of his quite well-known story, The Man Who Would Be King, the story of two ne'er-do-wells who set up a mountain kingdom. This is a critique of imperialists overreaching themselves. The message here, as in his later poem, Recessional, is that if you want to rule, you've got to rule responsibly. You've got to do it properly. And a new generation of critics have looked at this, and they now talk of Kipling as a liminal writer. It's not one of my favourite words, but in some ways I quite like it. As though he's a bridge between colonial and post-colonial writing. In Orwell's writing, he pokes fun at, attacks Kipling almost for the way that he talks about the common soldier. But I would argue that Kipling is very sympathetic to the common soldier. He spent long hours talking to soldiers in the barracks in Lahore, just outside Lahore, and he tried to understand what made them tick. One of his best-known poems is Tommy, and it's a wonderful line where he says, "Yes, making mock of uniforms that guard you while you sleep is cheaper than them uniforms, and their starvation cheap. And husting drunken soldiers when they're going large a bit is 5 times better business than parading in full kit." And then there's the lines that make you realise Kipling understood what this man was about. "Then it's Tommy this and Tommy that, and Tommy how's your soul? But it's thin red line of heroes when the drums begin to roll." Orwell seems to think that the soldiers hated their experience of being in the army, but I'm not so sure. And I think the real soldier can be heard in Kipling's poems and in their reminiscences in poems such as Chant Pagan and The Road to Mandalay, which has soldiers looking back on their experience of being abroad. When he wanted, Kipling could be a great political poet. There was this tub-thumping and propaganda for the Boer and First World Wars. But he could get wonderfully steamed up about the waste and incompetence of the Iraq campaign, which led to the surrender of the British garrison at Kut al Mara in April 1944. 16. They shall not return to us, the resolute, the young, the eager and wholehearted whom we gave, but the men who left them thriftily to die in their own dung. Shall they come with years and honour to the grave? This is Kipling taking the generals to task. And in other writings, such as his epitaphs for war, Kipling could also summon up the pathos of war, as well as any of the more acknowledged First World War poets. In his stories, and I'm going to fly the flag a bit for Kipling after 1900, he shows amazing understanding of the tribulations of people who had served during the war. And one of his ongoing themes is the trauma of war. And just to sort of come to the end of his career, he died in 1936. In later poems from the early 30s, such as Bonfires on the Ice and The Storm Cone, he began to rail against the political ineffectualness that he saw around him in the face of a resurgent Germany and the rise of fascism. The Storm Cone, the first lines: "This is the midnight, let no star delude us, dawn is very far. This is the tempest long foretold, slow to make head, but sure to hold." And there you have Kipling retaining his understanding of what is going on in the world. I think that at that stage I will draw it to a close, and I hope that you will vote for Mr. Kipling.